My mother-in-law strutted into the event venue my grandfather left me after 40 years of calloused hands. When my husband clinked his glass to announce his brother's new role as managing partner and asked me to hand over the financial ledgers, I grabbed the microphone with a bright smile and uttered a sentence that made his family's smug grins instantly vanish. Grandpa Walter didn't just build this place. He bled into it. The property was a ruined dairy farm in upstate New York when he bought it in the 80s. The roof of the main barn was caved in, the soil was choked with rocks, and the bank was constantly breathing down his neck. He spent his life transforming it into a $1 million wedding and event venue. I grew up watching him haul timber in the freezing rain. I watched him mix mortar and lay every single river stone for the main pavilion by hand. When money was tight in the early days, he rented out his own farmhouse to weekenders and slept on a military cot in the unheated barn. He raised me on that dirt, taught me how to read a contract before I was in high school, taught me how to spot a vendor who was cutting corners. 3 days before I got married to Brendan, Walter called me into his office. It smelled like cedar shavings and old coffee, the same as it always did. He didn't look well. The cancer was already eating at him, making his flannel shirts hang off his shoulders like sails on a dead wind. He pushed a thick leather binder across his scratched mahogany desk. Inside were the articles of incorporation for the venue, an ironclad trust document, and the sole deed to the property. All of it was strictly in my maiden name. He didn't smile. He pointed a grease-stained finger directly at my chest. "Never let anyone put their name on my dirt," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp, especially a man wearing a suit he didn't pay for. I promised him I wouldn't. I locked the binder in my safe. Walter died 6 months later, and I took over the venue completely. I kept his traditions alive. I kept his staff, and I adopted his habit of auditing the security logs and server files every Friday night. Walter always said blind trust is how you lose an empire. I didn't realize until much later how right he was. The first year with Brendan was blissful. He was a high school history teacher. He was quiet, supportive, and seemed perfectly content to grade papers on the porch while I ran the business. He didn't care about the event industry. He just cared about me, or so I thought. The shift happened slowly. Brendan's brother, Sutton, got downsized from his mid-level management job at a tech firm in the city. Suddenly, Sutton was around all the time. He and Brendan spent every weekend on the patio, drinking my craft beer and brainstorming. Brendan said Sutton just needed a soft place to land while he figured out his next move. Then Sutton started showing up at the venue during operating hours. Unannounced, I would walk out of the catering kitchen and find him in the main hall, pacing the floorboards with a clipboard, taking measurements. A week later, a delivery truck showed up with 3 large crates. I opened them to find sleek, cold, metallic signage. They were meant to replace the rustic, hand-carved wooden signs Walter and I had made together. I found Sutton in the pavilion and told him to send them back. He gave me a patronizing smile, the kind you give a child who doesn't understand math. "The rustic aesthetic is dying," Sutton said. "We need to pivot to industrial chic. I'm just trying to elevate the brand." "There is no we," I told him. "And you don't touch the brand." That night, I confronted Brendan. I expected him to have my back. Instead, he rolled his eyes and let out a long, tired sigh. "He's just trying to help," Brendan said. "Sutton is an out-of-the-box visionary. You're too close to this place. You can't see the potential." Family lifts each other up. It didn't stop there. Their mother, Hester, started treating the venue like her personal country club. She would bring her wealthy, gossipy friends by for impromptu tours, walking through the gardens while my staff was trying to set up for actual paying clients. I overheard her introducing Sutton to a local caterer as the new managing director of the estate. I told Brendan to rein his family in. He told me I was being territorial and paranoid. 2 weeks ago, I couldn't sleep. The air in the bedroom felt thick. Brendan was snoring softly beside me. At 2:14 a.m., I slipped out of bed, went down to my home office, and opened my laptop. It was a Friday night. Time for Walter's audit. I logged into the venue's back-end booking software. Everything looked normal at first glance, but I knew the system architecture better than the developers did. I started digging into the directory. Deep in the file tree, tucked away in a hidden admin folder that only Brendan and I had passwords for, was a newly uploaded PDF. The file name was Callaway_partnership_draft_v3.pdf. My stomach dropped. I opened it. It was a drafted partnership agreement. It outlined a complete restructuring of the business, reassigning 40% of the venue's equity directly to Sutton Callaway. It gave him full executive control over vendor contracts, marketing, and renovations. Brendan was listed as the guarantor. It was scheduled to be executed on the 15th, the day of our annual summer tasting gala. I sat in the dark for a long time. The screen illuminated the framed photo of Grandpa Walter on my desk. I pulled up my personal banking app. I checked the venue's operating account. There was an $8,500 withdrawal logged that morning. The transaction note typed in Brendan's neat, careful syntax, read, upgraded irrigation equipment. I pulled the metadata off the PDF. It had been created by a high-end marketing agency in the city. I waited until 9:00 a.m. I called the agency and asked for the billing department. I told them I was reconciling my accounts and needed to confirm a recent payment. The account manager, a woman named Luz, happily confirmed that the $8,500 deposit for the Sutton Brothers management relaunch had cleared perfectly. I hung up the phone. I did not scream. I did not cry. I didn't throw anything. The rage I felt was perfectly cold. It felt like ice water in my veins. I walked upstairs. I made eggs and toast. I poured Brendan a cup of coffee. When he came into the kitchen rubbing the sleep from his eyes, I smiled and kissed his cheek. "Big week coming up," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "You ready for the gala?" "I'm getting everything in order," I said. On Wednesday, I told Brendan I was going into the city to meet with a new floral vendor. Instead, I drove to the financial district and spent 4 hours in a glass-walled conference room with Arlo Locke, a ruthless corporate litigator who owed Grandpa Walter a favor from a zoning dispute 20 years ago. Arlo took one look at the PDF, looked at the trust documents, and smiled a terrible, sharp smile. We drew up the paperwork. On Thursday, I hired an independent IT contractor named Jasper. I brought him to the venue after hours. We installed a hard enterprise-grade firewall on the servers. We wiped all remote access capabilities. We changed every administrative password and revoked every unapproved keycard. Sutton's digital footprint was erased from my business in under an hour. Saturday was their ambush. Brendan had organized the summer tasting gala under the guise of drumming up new business. He had packed the main pavilion with local vendors, wealthy clients, the mayor, and his entire smirking family. The room was draped in string lights and smelled of expensive catering and desperation. Sutton was working the room in a tailored navy suit he couldn't afford, shaking hands like a politician on the eve of an election. Hester held court by the main bar, her wrists heavy with gold bracelets. I stood near the catering doors and listened to her loudly brag to the mayor's wife about her boy's new enterprise, and how they were finally bringing this quaint little farm into the 21st century. Halfway through the evening, Brendan marched up the stairs onto the center stage. He tapped the microphone. The chatter in the room died down. He gave a sweeping, rehearsed speech about family legacies, about growth, and about new beginnings. He talked about how a business must adapt or die. He talked about vision. Then, he looked down at me in the front row. His smile was warm, practiced, and entirely dead behind the eyes. "And so," Brendan said, his voice echoing over the PA system, "I'd like to ask my beautiful wife to bring up the master financial ledgers, so we can officially sign the new charter and welcome my brother Sutton as the new managing partner of the estate." The room applauded politely. Hester beamed. Sutton adjusted his cuffs and stepped onto the stage next to my husband. I stood up. I walked up the 3 wooden stairs. I took the microphone from Brendan's hand. I did not give him a ledger. I handed him a thin manila folder. I turned to the crowd. "The thing about a legacy," I said, my voice perfectly steady, "is that you actually have to own the dirt to build on it." I pointed a small remote at the ceiling and pressed a button. The projector whirred to life. Instead of the sleek, metallic Sutton Brothers logo they were expecting, a high-resolution scan flashed onto the 20-foot white screen behind us. It was Grandpa Walter's original trust document, alongside the sole ownership deed. My maiden name was highlighted in bright yellow marker. The room went dead silent. I turned my head and looked directly at Hester. "Your $8,500 irrigation equipment charge bought a marketing package my lawyers seized on Thursday." Hester's jaw went slack. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking old and fragile beneath her makeup. I looked back at the crowd, and the security team by the exits will be escorting the visionaries off my property. Now, Brendan stood frozen. The manila folder I had handed him slipped from his fingers and hit the floorboards with a soft smack. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sutton didn't freeze. His face flushed dark red. He stormed off the stage, shouldered past a waiter, and pulled out his phone. I stood on the stage and watched him through the massive pavilion windows. He was standing alone in the gravel parking lot, furiously tapping his screen, his thumbs moving frantically as he realized his admin privileges, his email access, and his digital keys had been permanently erased. The bouncers, 3 off-duty cops I hired specifically for tonight, moved in quietly. They flanked Brendan. They flanked Hester. They walked them out of the building without a drop of violence, just the heavy, undeniable weight of legal authority. I finished the gala. I smiled at the vendors. I poured champagne. I operated my business. I drove home at midnight. The house was dark. Brendan's car wasn't in the driveway. His keys were on the kitchen counter, next to a hastily packed duffel bag that was missing from the hall closet. Good. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the sink. The adrenaline was finally leaving my system, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. I had won. My property was safe. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. It was an unknown number. I stared at it for 3 rings. Then I picked it up. "Hello?" I said. "He didn't just stumble into your life, you know," a woman's voice said. She sounded calm, deliberate, and entirely sober. "Who is this?" I asked. "Your grandfather knew what the Calloway family was long before you said yes to Brendan," the voice continued, ignoring my question. "He knew exactly who Hester was. He left something else in that leather binder. Check the false bottom." My grip tightened on the phone. "Who are you? And whatever you do," the woman said, her voice dropping a fraction of an inch, "don't tell your lawyer." The line clicked dead. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. I looked at the dark screen of my phone. I didn't call the number back. I knew it would be a burner or a disconnected line. I put my water glass down. I walked down the hall to my home office. I closed the blinds and locked the door behind me. I knelt in front of the floor safe hidden beneath a rug in the corner. I spun the dial. 32 right, 14 left, 41 right. The heavy steel door clicked open. I reached inside and pulled out the thick leather binder Walter had given me. I carried it to my desk and turned on the small brass lamp. I opened it. The deed, the trust, the articles of incorporation, they were all still there, exactly where I left them. I took the papers out and set them aside. I ran my fingertips over the velvet interior of the back cover. I pressed down. Nothing. I traced the seams where the leather was stitched together. The bottom edge felt thicker than the top. I pressed my thumb hard against the lower right corner. There was a faint snap. The inner lining of the back cover popped loose. It wasn't a velvet lining at all. It was a rigid piece of cardboard, wrapped in fabric, held in place by tiny, hidden brass clasps. I pulled it back. Lying in the recessed space was a single manila envelope. It was sealed with heavy packing tape, yellowed with age. I picked it up. It felt heavy. I grabbed a letter opener from my pen cup and sliced through the tape. Inside was a stack of canceled checks, heavily rubber-banded, and a series of folded letters. I pulled the checks out first. They were drawn from Grandpa Walter's personal account, dating back to 1998. They were all made out to the same person, Hester Calloway. The amounts were staggering. $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. The memo lines were all blank. The payments occurred once a quarter, every quarter, for almost 7 years. My breath caught in my throat. Walter had been paying her. Why? I put the checks down and unfolded the first letter. The paper was crisp, the ink a faded blue. It was handwritten, dated August 14th, 1997. I recognized the sharp, aggressive cursive instantly. It was the same handwriting I had seen on Hester's RSVP cards. Walter. The letter read, The zoning board meets on the 20th. I have the votes to reclassify your acreage as commercial waste. Your little dairy farm will be condemned by September. You have my terms. You pay the debt your brother left behind, or I take the dirt. I don't care how you get the money, but you will pay me. I stared at the words. Walter's brother, my great-uncle Thomas. Thomas had died in a car wreck in the early 90s. My family never talked about him. I grabbed the next piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a printed email, dated 6 years ago, 3 months before I met Brendan at that coffee shop downtown. The email was from Hester to Brendan. Brendan, she goes to the roaster on 4th Street every Tuesday morning at 8:00 a.m. Walter is sick. He won't last the year. The trust is impenetrable while he's alive, but once he's gone, marital assets can be leveraged. Do not screw this up. We have waited 20 years to get that land back. I dropped the paper. It fluttered onto the mahogany desk, landing next to the framed photo of my grandfather. My marriage wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a failure. It was an assignment. Brendan hadn't accidentally bumped into me while reaching for a dark roast. He had hunted me. I looked back at the envelope. There was one more document inside. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a legal promissory note, signed by my great-uncle Thomas, transferring partial rights of the original farm deed to Hester Calloway's late husband in the event of default. The document had a large red stamp across it that read contested pending litigation, and at the bottom, signed as the notary public verifying the signatures, was a name I recognized. Arlo Locke, my lawyer, the man I had just entrusted with the absolute defense of my estate, the man I had just given unfettered access to Walter's trust. The woman on the phone was right. I couldn't tell my lawyer, because my lawyer had been involved in the Calloway dispute since the beginning, and I had just handed him the keys to the castle. I sat back in my chair. The house was completely silent. The firewall Jasper built was keeping Sutton out of my servers, but it couldn't protect me from a piece of paper signed in 1997. I looked at the email again. Marital assets can be leveraged. Brendan was gone, but he was still my legal husband. And if Arlo Locke was working both sides, the ambush at the gala wasn't their only plan. It was just the distraction. I stared at Arlo's signature until the ink blurred. I didn't cry. That was the strangest part. I had just realized that my entire marriage was a real estate transaction, that the man I had slept next to for 4 years was a hollow, calculated fiction, and I didn't shed a single tear. Every anniversary dinner, every shared cup of coffee, every time Brendan had rubbed my shoulders after a long wedding shift, it was all just time on the clock. He hadn't fallen in love with me. He had been sent to retrieve a deed. I felt sick, yes. My stomach twisted into a tight, hard knot, but I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt hunted. I stood up and laid every piece of paper flat on the mahogany desk under the glare of the brass lamp. I took out my phone. I photographed the checks, the blackmail letter, the printed email, and the promissory note, making sure the edges were sharp and the dates were legible. I uploaded the files directly to the encrypted cloud directory Jasper had built for me on Thursday. I wasn't about to leave the hard copies in the safe. If Arlo Locke knew about the trust, he probably knew about the safe too. I slid the originals into a thick plastic freezer bag, zipped it tight, and walked out the back door into the cool night air. I went to my truck, unlocked the heavy steel toolbox bolted to the bed, and buried the bag under a tangle of jumper cables and heavy-duty ratchet straps. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen island. The house was too quiet. The clock on the microwave read 2:18 a.m. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. I don't know why I hadn't checked it earlier. Maybe some part of me was still clinging to the idea that Brendan was just a weak man manipulated by his family, rather than an active predator. The balance was zero. He had drained the $42,000 we had saved for a supposed house expansion. The transfer had gone through on Friday afternoon to an external account I didn't recognize. He had taken his duffel bag, his keys, and every liquid cent we shared. He knew the ambush at the gala might fail, and he had secured his severance package before the first appetizer was even served. I picked up my phone and opened the call log. I stared at the unknown number for a long time. Then I tapped it. It rang twice. The same calm, deliberate voice answered. "You found it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I found it," I said, keeping my voice low. "Who are you?" "Someone who hates Hester Calloway as much as you do," she said. "I also happen to be the person who can explain exactly what Arlo Locke is going to do to you on Monday morning if you don't get in front of this." "How do you know Arlo?" "Meet me at the diner on Route 9, the woman said. 7 a.m. Sit in a back booth." The line clicked dead. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I spent the next 4 hours drinking black coffee and combing through every single financial record Walter had left behind, looking for any other loose threads, any other debts that Hester could use as a wedge. I found nothing. Just the contested note from 1997. At 6:30, I took a shower, put on a clean pair of jeans and a heavy flannel shirt, and drove to the diner. The sun was just coming up, casting long, pale shadows across the empty highway. The diner smelled like stale grease and burnt coffee. I slid into a booth in the far back corner. 10 minutes later, the bell above the door chimed. A woman walked in. She looked to be in her early 50s, wearing a sharp, expensive trench coat that looked a few years out of style. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, no-nonsense bun, and her eyes were a piercing, icy blue. She spotted me instantly and walked over, sliding into the vinyl seat across from me. "I'm Imogen," she said. She didn't offer her hand. "Sutton's ex-wife," I said. I remembered the name vaguely. Brendan had mentioned her once, very early in our relationship, dismissing her as a bitter woman who took Sutton to the cleaners in a divorce settlement. Imogen gave a short, humorless laugh. "If Brendan told you about me, he probably told you I ruined his brother. The truth is, I got out before they could ruin me. I was married to Sutton for 3 years. I worked as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in the city. That's how they found Arlo Locke. The waitress came by and poured us both coffee. We waited in silence until she walked away. Hester is broke," Imogen said softly, leaning over the table. "I don't mean comfortable, but struggling broke. I mean drowning. The Calloway family has been insolvent for a decade. The tailored suits, the country club memberships, the cars. It's all a house of cards built on maxed out credit and leveraged equity. Sutton didn't get downsized from his tech job. He was fired for embezzling petty cash to cover his mother's property taxes. taxes. I stared at her, the pieces slowly clicking into place. The venue. Exactly. Imogen nodded. They don't want to run your wedding venue. Sutton has no idea how to manage an event space, and Hester wouldn't be caught dead doing actual work. They want to force a sale. There's a commercial developer who wants to buy your land, bulldoze the pavilion, and put up high-density luxury condos. The offer on the table is north of $4 million. Hester just needs a controlling stake to force the liquidation. But Arlo, I said, my voice tightening. Why would my grandfather's lawyer help them? Because Arlo Locke is the one holding the paper on Hester's debts, Imogen said, taking a sip of her black coffee. He gave her a massive off-the-books bridge loan 5 years ago to keep her house out of foreclosure. She hasn't paid him a dime. The only way Arlo gets his money back is if Hester gets her hands on your dirt. They're working together. They have been since before Brendan even introduced himself to you. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I thought I had outsmarted them by locking them out of the servers and throwing them out of the gala. I was playing checkers. They were playing a much uglier game. So what happens tomorrow? I asked. Imogen folded her hands on the table. Brendan isn't running away. He's sitting in his mother's dining room right now with Arlo, drafting an emergency petition. They are going to court tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Brendan is going to claim you are having a severe mental breakdown. I scoffed. A breakdown? You locked your husband out of his own home. You subjected his family to a humiliating public tirade. You unilaterally altered access to a shared business. And, Imogen paused, her eyes narrowing, you've been hiding a massive, contested debt from the state regarding the property's original deed. It's a fraudulent debt. It doesn't matter, Imogen said flatly. Arlo is going to present that promissory note from your great-uncle to a judge he plays golf with. He's going to argue that the venue's assets are in imminent danger because of your erratic behavior, and he's going to request an emergency receivership, which means Brendan will be granted temporary legal control over the business until the divorce and the debt can be sorted out. If Brendan got temporary control, even for a week, he could sign a letter of intent with the developer. He could encumber the property with so much debt I would have no choice but to sell. I need a lawyer, I said. You need a shark, Imogen corrected. Someone from outside the county. Someone Arlo doesn't play golf with. She reached into her pocket and slid a plain white business card across the table. It had a name and a phone number on it. Coralie Trask, attorney at law. She's in the city, Imogen said. She specializes in hostile corporate disputes, and she absolutely despises Arlo Locke. I called her at midnight. She's expecting you to call her today. But she's not cheap, and she won't take the case unless you have proof. I have the proof, I said, thinking of the heavy plastic bag sitting in the toolbox of my truck. Good, but you need to understand something, Imogen said, her tone dropping, becoming deadly serious. Hester isn't going to just wait for the court to open tomorrow. If they get wind that you know about Arlo, they will try to physically take possession of the venue today. Brendan is still legally your husband. His name might not be on the deed, but if he shows up with a locksmith and a copy of your marriage license, the local cops are just going to call it a domestic dispute and refuse to intervene. I looked out the diner window. The sky was bright now, a clear, crisp Sunday morning. The venue was booked for a large corporate retreat starting at noon. My staff would be arriving in 2 hours to set up. If Brendan showed up, he wouldn't just be making a scene. He would be establishing a physical presence on the property to bolster his claim for tomorrow's hearing. Thank you, I said, grabbing the business card and sliding it into my pocket. I threw a $20 bill on the table. Don't thank me yet, Imogen called out as I stood up. Hester Calloway is a desperate woman. Desperate women don't care how much damage they do when they're backed into a corner. I walked out to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. I got in, locked the doors, and pulled out my phone. I dialed the number on the business card. Coralie Trask picked up on the first ring. I have the documents, I told her. Everything Imogen said was true. Can you be at my office in Manhattan in 2 hours? Coralie asked. Her voice was sharp, fast, all business. I can't, I said, pulling the truck onto the highway, hitting the gas. My husband is going to try to take over my property today. I have to go back to the farm. Listen to me very carefully, Coralie said, the line crackling slightly. Do not engage with him. If he shows up, you do not yell, you do not threaten him. You do not give him any ammunition he can use in front of a judge tomorrow. Do you have private security? I had off-duty cops last night. Today is just my regular event staff. Get security, she snapped, right now, and do whatever you have to do to keep him out of the main office. I'll start drafting a counter petition to block the receivership, but you need to hold the fort until Monday. I hung up. I called Jasper, the it guy. He answered groggily. I told him I needed the electronic locks on the main office completely disabled. No key cards, no overrides. I wanted the office mechanically locked from the inside. I pulled into the long dirt driveway of the venue just before 8 o'clock. The morning dew was still heavy on the grass, and the massive wooden doors of the main pavilion were closed. It looked peaceful. It looked like the place Grandpa Walter and I had built. But as I rounded the bend toward the gravel parking lot, my chest tightened. Sitting right in front of the main office steps was Brendan's SUV. Next to it was a white panel van I didn't recognize. And standing by the door, holding a heavy-duty drill and a ring of lockpicks, was a man in a gray uniform. Brendan was standing next to him, pointing at the deadbolt. I cut the engine and stepped out of the truck. My boots crunched loudly on the gravel, echoing in the quiet morning air. Brendan's head snapped toward me. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed, like I had interrupted him while he was mowing the lawn. I remembered Coralie's voice in my ear. Do not yell. Do not give him ammunition. I kept my hands out of my pockets. I walked at a normal, steady pace toward the main office doors. The locksmith, a heavy-set guy with a patch on his shoulder that read Lachlan Security and Lock, took a step back, sensing the sudden shift in the air. Morning, I said, looking directly at the locksmith. I'm the property owner. Can I ask what you're doing to my door? The locksmith looked at Brendan, then back at me. This gentleman said he lost the master keys, showed me a marriage license and a utility bill, said it was an emergency to get in before the staff arrived. The utility bill is for our residential home, which is 10 miles away, I said, my voice perfectly level. I pulled my driver's license and my state business registration card out of my wallet and held them out. This is a commercial property property. It is solely owned by an LLC in my maiden name. He is not an owner, an employee, or an authorized vendor. If you put that drill to my door, I will press charges for attempted breaking and entering, and I will name your bonded company in the suit." The locksmith didn't even look at my cards. He just looked at my face, saw that I was dead serious, and immediately started packing up his drill. "Hey, wait," Brendan said, dropping the calm facade for a second. "I'm paying you double the weekend rate. We have a contract." "Buddy, I don't do domestics," the locksmith muttered, shoving his lockpicks into his canvas bag. "Call a lawyer." He didn't wait for a response. He walked briskly to his white panel van, threw his bag in the back, and drove off, spraying a little gravel in his haste to get off my property. Brendan and I were left standing on the steps of the office. The air felt thin. We were alone, just the two of us, for the first time since I had stood on that stage and ruined his mother's life. He looked at me, really looked at me. The soft, supportive husband I had known for 4 years was entirely gone. His posture was different. The slope of his shoulders, the set of his jaw, it was all rigid, calculating. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my husband's clothes. "You're making a mistake," Brendan said. His voice was low, soothing, the exact tone a crisis negotiator uses on someone standing on a ledge. It was entirely for show, a rehearsal for the judge tomorrow. "You aren't well. You've been manic all weekend. I'm just trying to secure the business until we can get you some help." "Don't," I said. "Don't do the concerned husband routine. There's no audience here. Your mother isn't watching." "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, taking a slow step toward me. "You're having a paranoid episode. You locked my family out. You locked me out. You're destroying what we built." "I built it," I corrected him. "My grandfather built it. You just drank my beer and waited for him to die." A flicker of genuine anger crossed his face, breaking the careful mask. He stepped closer, crowding my personal space. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. "You think you're so smart because you found a little paperwork?" Brendan sneered, dropping the volume of his voice so it barely carried over the rustling leaves of the oak trees. "You think locking a door changes anything? Arlo has the promissory note. The venue is collateral on a debt that predates your ownership. Tomorrow morning, Judge Farrow is going to place this entire estate in a temporary receivership because the sole owner is exhibiting severe psychological distress and actively sabotaging the business operations. And guess who the court is going to appoint as the receiver?" He tapped his own chest. "I'm going to take the keys," he whispered. "I'm going to sign the letter of intent with the developers on Tuesday. And then I'm going to put you in a facility where you can rest." "Sweetheart," I looked at him, feeling that cold, icy calm wash over me again. "You drained the joint account. I secured marital assets from an erratic spouse," he countered smoothly. "Standard procedure." A pair of headlights swept across the gravel. My event manager Nadia pulled in, driving her beat-up Honda. She parked near the catering entrance and got out, holding a massive clipboard and a thermos of coffee. She stopped when she saw us standing rigidly on the office steps. "Everything okay?" Nadia called out, her brow furrowing. Brendan turned to her, instantly deploying his warm Teacher of the Year smile. "Everything's fine, Nadia, actually. There's been a slight change of plans for today's corporate retreat. I'm going to be overseeing the floor setup. Why don't you go ahead and start pulling the linens?" Nadia blinked. She had worked for me for 5 years. She knew Brendan didn't know the difference between a highboy table and a chafing dish. She looked past him, locking eyes with me. "Nadia," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the lot. "Brendan is leaving. He is no longer permitted on the property. Please go inside and let the security detail know they can clock in early. I want 2 men at the front gate and 1 by the pavilion doors until the retreat is over." Nadia didn't ask questions. She nodded sharply. "Got it." She turned and jogged into the pavilion. Brendan's jaw clenched. He realized he had lost the physical standoff. He couldn't force his way into the office, and he couldn't commandeer my staff. But he didn't leave. Instead, he walked over to his SUV, leaned against the hood, and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number, put the phone to his ear, and watched me. "Yes. Hello. Is this the county dispatcher?" Brendan said. His voice was suddenly thick with distress. He sounded on the verge of tears. "I need an officer at the Walter Estate venue." "Yes, my wife. She's having some kind of mental break. She's locked me out of our business, she's acting highly aggressive, and she just threatened me. I'm really scared she might hurt herself or someone else." He hung up and gave me a flat, dead-eyed stare. "Let's see how well you handle a psychiatric wellness check in front of your clients." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I turned around, walked down the steps, and sat on the wooden bench under the oak tree. I pulled out my phone and texted Coralie. He called the cops, claiming I'm a danger to myself and having a manic episode. Her reply came 30 seconds later. "Do not speak to him. When the police arrive, be boring. Do not act outraged. Outrage looks like mania to a bored cop. Show them your ID. Show them the business registration. Tell them you are finalizing a divorce and he is unhappy about it. Be the calmest person in the county." 10 minutes later, a county sheriff's cruiser came up the driveway, its lights flashing silently. It parked at a harsh angle, blocking the exit. 2 deputies got out. I recognized the older one instantly. Deputy Thad. He used to buy sweet corn from Grandpa Walter when the farm was still operational. Brendan was on them the second their boots hit the dirt. He played the part flawlessly. He kept his voice low, his hands open and non-threatening. He pointed at me, then at the locked office, weaving a story about a sudden, terrifying shift in my personality. How I had fired his brother for no reason. How I was making paranoid claims about his family trying to steal from me. Thad listened, nodding slowly, taking notes on a small pad. The younger deputy kept his hand resting casually on his duty belt, watching me. Eventually, Thad walked over to the bench. "Morning," he said, his voice cautious. "Everything all right today?" "I'm perfectly fine, Thad," I said, remaining seated. I didn't raise my voice. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "I'm sorry you had to drive out here for this. Brendan and I are separating. I caught him embezzling company funds to pay his mother's debts, and I informed him last night that I'm filing for divorce. He's very upset. She's lying." Brendan shouted from by the cruiser. "Ask her about the trust. Ask her about the conspiracy she thinks my family is running." "Sir, stay by the car," the younger deputy warned. Thad looked back at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of the the hysteria Brendan had described. He says, "You locked him out of his own office." "It's not his office," I said. "I handed Thad my license and the business registration. This property and the operating LLC are entirely in my name. He is not on the deed. He is not an employee." I asked him to leave, and he refused. Thad looked at the paperwork, recognized my maiden name, and let out a long, heavy sigh. He handed the cards back to me. "All right, I see." He walked back to Brendan. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I could hear the tone. Thad was explaining that this was a civil dispute, that without a court order, Brendan had no legal right to be on a commercially registered property if the sole owner wanted him gone. Brendan's face flushed. The concerned husband act began to crack, revealing the sheer, arrogant entitlement underneath. "I am her husband. This is marital property. You can't just let her steal my livelihood because she's having a tantrum." "Sir," Thad said, his voice hardening, "if you don't step into your vehicle and leave the premises, I'm going to cite you for trespassing and disturbing the peace. You can take it up with a judge." Brendan glared at Thad, then looked past him to me. The venom in his eyes was absolute. He didn't say another word. He got into his SUV, slammed the door so hard the frame shook, and peeled out of the parking lot, kicking up a cloud of white dust. Thad walked back over to me. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "You okay?" "I am," I said quietly. "Walter always said that boy was too clean to be trusted," Thad muttered, staring down the driveway. "You need us to stick around?" "No, I have private security here for the event. But thank you, Thad. You get a lawyer. A mean one." I did. After the deputies left, the venue slowly hummed to life. The catering trucks arrived. The florists began setting up in the pavilion. I walked through the motions, checking inventory, signing invoices, and making sure the corporate retreat went off without a hitch. I smiled at the clients. I shook hands. I poured coffee. I was a ghost operating a machine. At 2 p.m., I went into the main office and locked the door behind me. I sat at Walter's mahogany desk and opened my laptop. I needed to send Coralie the rest of the financial logs she had asked for to build the counter petition for tomorrow's hearing. I logged into the business banking portal. I pulled up the primary operating account to download the last 12 months of statements. The screen loaded. I stared at the numbers. The balance was fine. The operating funds were untouched. But right below the primary checking account, there was a new tab. A tab that hadn't been there on Friday night. Commercial line of credit active. I clicked it. My chest seized. It was a revolving credit line drawn against the equity of the business. The limit was $250,000, and the current drawn balance was exactly $250,000. The funds had been transferred out to an external holding account on Friday morning, just hours before the gala. I scrambled for my phone and called the bank's commercial support line. I waited on hold for 10 agonizing minutes before a representative named Sable answered. "I need to report a fraudulent withdrawal," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Someone opened a line of credit against my LLC and maxed it out." Sable tapped her keyboard. "Let me pull up the account." "Okay, I see the credit line. It was originated last week and fully executed on Friday. But ma'am, it doesn't look fraudulent. We have signed authorization forms from the business guarantor." "I am the sole owner of the business," I said. "I didn't sign anything." "The guarantor listed on the loan documents isn't you," Sable said, sounding slightly confused. "The documents were executed by your managing partner, a Mr. Sutton Calloway. He provided a notarized partnership agreement establishing his executive authority to bind the LLC in financial contracts. The drafted PDF, the one I had found on the server, the one that wasn't supposed to be signed until the gala. It wasn't signed," I told her, my voice rising despite my efforts. "That partnership agreement was a draft. It was never executed." "Ma'am, I'm looking at the digital scan right now," Sable said defensively. "It has your signature on it, and it's stamped by a certified notary public, a Mr. Arlo Locke." I closed my eyes. The office suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. Arlo hadn't just sat on a 20-year-old blackmail note. He had actively crossed the line into felony forgery. He was the one who notarized a phantom document, creating a legal bridge for Sutton to raid my equity. "Freeze the account," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. "Note the file that the primary LLC member is reporting identity theft and wire fraud." Sable sounded panicked. "Ma'am, I can put a temporary fraud hold on the credit line, but the $250,000 has already cleared the wire transfer. It's gone. We can't claw it back without a police report and a court order. Then lock it down so they can't draw another cent," I said, and hung up the phone. I immediately dialed Coralie. She answered on the second ring, the muffled sound of city traffic in the background. "They just drew $250,000 in equity," I told her, pacing the length of Walter's desk. "Sutton took out a commercial line of credit using a forged partnership agreement. Arlo Locke notarized it on Friday." Coralie let out a low, sharp breath. Imogen was right. Arlo is drowning right alongside them. If Hester goes bankrupt, Arlo loses his off-the-books loan. He's risking his notary license and his law practice to mint a fake document so Sutton could pull cash out of your property. They're going to use that money to pay Arlo off and use the rest to bury you in litigation. Can we report Arlo to the police?" "Not today," Coralie snapped. "Today is Sunday. White-collar fraud takes weeks to investigate. The police will look at a notarized document and tell you it's a civil matter until a judge says otherwise. Right now, they have $250,000 of your money, and they are going to walk into court tomorrow morning looking like fully funded, legitimate business partners trying to stop a crazy woman from sinking the ship. I need you to go through every single email, text, and physical note Brendan has sent you in the last 6 months. I need proof of state of mind. Send it all to the secure drive." "I'm in the middle of a corporate retreat," I said, rubbing my temples. "I have 150 executives sitting in my pavilion." "Smile, pour the coffee, and act like you own the world," Coralie said. "Do not let the mask slip. I will see you in court at 9 tomorrow." I ended the call. I sat at the mahogany desk for exactly 60 seconds, forcing my breathing to slow down. In, out, I was not going to break. I unlocked the office door and walked back out into the bright, overwhelming sunshine of a Sunday afternoon. The retreat was in full swing. The catering staff was moving seamlessly between the highboy tables. Oren, my head caterer, was standing by the buffet line, looking stressed. I walked over to him, pasting on my best, most radiant venue owner smile. "Everything looking good, Oren?" I asked. He turned to me, wiping his hands on his apron. "The food is fine, but I've been getting some weird calls this morning. Sutton called me at 6 a.m. My smile froze. "Sutton called you?" "Yeah. Told me the venue was under new management and that all outstanding vendor invoices were being restructured. He said if I wanted to stay on the preferred vendor list, I needed to accept a 20% cut on my rate for today's event. I told him to go to hell, but I need to know if my check is going to clear today." "Your check will clear," I promised him, keeping my voice steady. "Sutton is no longer affiliated with this property. Ignore him." Before Oren could reply, Nadia came jogging across the lawn. Her face was pale. She was holding her tablet out like it was a live grenade. "You missed a password," she said, out of breath. "What?" "The social media accounts," Nadia said, shoving the tablet into my hands. Jasper wiped the servers, but the Instagram and Facebook pages were linked to Sutton's personal phone for two-factor authentication. I looked at the screen. It was the venue's official page, the one with 12,000 followers and years of 5-star reviews. 10 minutes ago, a new post had gone live. It was a graphic of the sleek metallic Sutton Brothers logo. The caption read, "Exciting things are happening. Under the new executive direction of Sutton Calloway, the estate is closing its doors starting tomorrow for a massive, multi-million-dollar renovation. We are pivoting to luxury. All future bookings are currently being reviewed for cancellation or upgrade. Stay tuned." Below the post, the comments were already flooding in. Brides who had weddings booked for next month were panicking. Vendors were asking what was going on. My phone in my pocket started to buzz. Then Oren's phone buzzed. Then Nadia's. "They're trying to tank the business," Nadia whispered, watching the notification counter spin upward. "If they scare off the fall calendar, we lose $100,000 in deposits by Tuesday." He's manufacturing a crisis, I realized, the sickness in my stomach turning into a hard, dense stone. He wants to walk into court tomorrow and show the judge that the business is in freefall and that he needs the receivership to save it. "What do we do?" Nadia asked. "Get Jasper on the phone. Tell him to contact the platforms and report the accounts as hacked. Get them taken down entirely if he has to. I'd rather have no page than this." I handed the tablet back to her and turned toward the pavilion. I needed to keep the current clients happy. But as I walked toward the main doors, a man in a cheap blue windbreaker stepped directly into my path. He didn't look like a corporate executive. He looked tired, bored, and thoroughly out of place on the manicured lawn. "You the owner?" he asked, glancing down at a clipboard. "I am," I said. He pulled a thick manila envelope from under his arm and pressed it into my chest. "You've been served." He turned and walked away across the gravel, getting into a rusted sedan parked near the gates. I stood in the sun, holding the envelope. The front was stamped with the seal of the county family court. I walked past the pavilion, past the music and the clinking glasses, and slipped into the quiet, humid air of the catering kitchen. I leaned against the stainless steel prep table and tore the envelope open. It was Brendan's emergency petition for receivership, just as Imogen had warned, but it was accompanied by a separate filing, a petition for emergency spousal maintenance, and a preliminary injunction against my personal assets. I flipped to Brendan's sworn affidavit. I started reading, and the words made my vision blur. He didn't just claim I was erratic. He had built a meticulously crafted, devastatingly intimate lie. He swore, under penalty of perjury, that I had been suffering from an undiagnosed manic disorder since Walter's death. He claimed that I had developed a severe gambling addiction, completely fabricating a story about me taking secret weekend trips to casinos in Atlantic City. The respondent has been siphoning operational funds from the business to support this habit, the affidavit read. On Friday, realizing the extent of her financial instability, I transferred the remaining $42,000 of our joint marital savings into a secure account to prevent her from gambling away our home expansion fund. In retaliation, she has barred me from my place of employment and subjected my family to severe emotional abuse. I gripped the edge of the metal table. He had taken the theft of our savings and weaponized it, casting himself as the responsible husband protecting our nest egg from his spiraling, addicted wife. He attached a secondary exhibit. It was a printed summary of my Friday night server audits, the ones Grandpa Walter taught me to do. Brendan had categorized the timestamps, 2:00 a.m., 3:15 a.m., 4:00 a.m., framing my late-night bookkeeping as insomnia-driven paranoia and erratic surveillance of employees. Every quiet moment of our marriage, every time he had rubbed my shoulders while I stayed up late working on the business, he had been taking notes. He had been building a psychological profile to use against me. The kitchen doors swung open. Nadia rushed in, her phone pressed to her ear. "Jasper is working on the accounts," she said, seeing my face. She stopped. "Are you okay? You look like you're going to throw up." "I'm fine," I lied, shoving the papers back into the envelope. "There's something else," Nadia said, lowering her phone. "The security guys at the front gate just radioed. Hester is here." I stood up straight. "Hester?" "Yeah, she just pulled up to the gate in a rented Mercedes. She's not trying to get in. She parked right across the street from the entrance. She's just sitting there, watching the cars go by." I walked out of the kitchen, marching straight through the pavilion and out the front doors. I jogged down the long gravel driveway, the heat of the afternoon sun beating down on my shoulders. When I reached the wrought iron front gates, I saw her. The rented silver Mercedes was parked on the shoulder of the county highway. The engine was idling. The passenger window was rolled down. Hester was sitting in the driver's seat wearing oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf, looking like she belonged on a yacht in Monaco instead of a dusty road in upstate New York. I walked right up to the gate, stopping just inside the property line. Hester turned her head. She didn't take off her sunglasses. She just offered me a small, tight, victorious smile. "You have a lovely property, dear," she called out over the hum of the engine. "I always said Walter had a good eye for dirt." "You're violating a trespass warning," I said, my voice carrying over the asphalt. "I'm on a public road," she replied breezily, tapping her manicured nails on the steering wheel. "I'm just enjoying the view. It's important to appreciate things before they change." I gripped the iron bars of the gate. "Brendan's affidavit is a joke. A judge is going to see right through it." Hester laughed, a dry, rattling sound. sound. Oh, sweetheart, you still don't get it, do you? It doesn't matter what the judge sees. It matters what the judge signs. And Arlo has made sure Judge Farrow is highly motivated to sign whatever we put in front of him. You think you're fighting a legal battle. You aren't. You're just waiting for the eviction notice. She reached over to the passenger seat and picked up a thick, glossy folder. She tossed it out the window. It hit the dirt on the side of the road with a heavy thud. A parting gift, Hester said. So you know exactly what's going to happen to Walter's legacy. She rolled the window up, put the Mercedes in drive, and glided smoothly down the highway, disappearing around the bend. I stood at the gate for a long moment, the dust from her tires settling on my boots. The security guard, a burly guy named Caden, looked at me hesitantly. You want me to grab that for you, boss? Caden asked. No, I said. I'll get it. I stepped through the pedestrian gate, walked to the side of the road, and picked up the folder. The glossy cover was emblazoned with the logo of a major commercial real estate developer based out of Manhattan. I opened it. It was a finalized architectural pitch deck. The first page was an aerial photograph of my venue, with harsh red lines drawn over the pavilion, the historic barn, and the gardens. The word demolition was printed in bold text across the center. The next page showed the proposed development. 4 massive, brutalist condo towers, paving over every inch of grass, every tree Walter had planted, every stone he had laid. But it was the last page that made my blood run completely cold. It was a copy of a signed letter of intent, agreeing to the sale of the land for $4.2 million. It was signed by the developer, and it was signed by Sutton Calloway, listing himself as the primary executor of the estate. The date next to Sutton's signature wasn't from last week. It wasn't from a month ago. It was dated 3 years ago, right after my 1-year wedding anniversary with Brendan. I traced the black ink of the date with my thumb. August 12, 2023, our first anniversary. We had spent that weekend at a bed and breakfast in Vermont. I remembered Brendan pouring me a glass of wine on the balcony, looking into my eyes, and telling me he couldn't wait to see what we built together over the next 50 years. While we were drinking that wine, his brother was signing a letter of intent to bulldoze my grandfather's legacy, the long con, the holding pattern. Brendan had waited exactly 1 year to establish a baseline of marital assets, and then they had started shopping the dirt. When Walter's trust proved too ironclad to break quietly, they shifted to manufacturing a crisis. I didn't throw the folder. I didn't tear the pages. I took out my phone, photographed every single page of the law in high resolution, and uploaded it to the secure drive. Then I texted Coralie. Check the drive. Folder marked developer law. My phone rang 30 seconds later. I'm looking at it, Coralie said. Her voice was completely devoid of its usual rapid-fire stress. It was cold, sharp, and intensely focused. 3 years ago. This establishes premeditation. It proves the receivership petition is a fraudulent mechanism to execute a pre-existing illicit sale. Is it enough? I asked. I'm going to ruin Arlo Locke, Coralie said quietly. I'll see you at the courthouse at 8:45. Monday morning. The county courthouse smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and old paper. I wore a tailored black suit. I walked through the metal detectors and found Coralie waiting by the heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B. She was taller in person, wearing a navy blue dress and carrying a single, slim leather briefcase. She didn't smile. She just nodded and pushed the door open. Brendan was already there. He was sitting at the petitioner's table wearing a subdued charcoal suit. He looked perfectly disheveled, just enough to sell the narrative of an exhausted, heartbroken husband forced to take desperate measures. Sutton sat behind him in the gallery, next to Hester. Hester was wearing a conservative gray dress, her pearls clutching her throat, and at the head of the table stood Arlo Locke, looking entirely relaxed, chatting amiably with the court clerk. When we walked in, Brendan's eyes locked onto me. He offered a sad, heavy sigh, the concerned husband, right to the bitter end. Arlo glanced at Coralie. His relaxed posture instantly vanished. He knew exactly who she was. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly under the harsh fluorescent lights. Judge Farrow entered at exactly 9 o'clock. He was an older man, heavily jowled, with a reputation for moving through his docket with impatient, irritable speed. All right, Farrow muttered, sitting down and adjusting his glasses. Emergency petition for receivership. Estate of Walter. I see. Mr. Locke, you have the floor. Keep it brief. Arlo cleared his throat. He purposefully avoided looking at Coralie. Thank you, Your Honor. We are here today because my client's wife is suffering from a severe and rapidly escalating psychological breakdown. She has locked my client out of his own business, fired staff erratically, and is actively squandering company assets. We are requesting an emergency temporary receivership to protect the estate's viability, and we are submitting a partnership agreement that establishes my client's brother, Sutton Calloway, as the managing partner to stabilize the operations. Arlo handed a stack of papers to the bailiff. I have also included a contested promissory note from 1997, which encumbers the property and requires immediate, rational management to resolve before the estate defaults. Judge Farrow flipped through the papers. And who is representing the respondent? Coralie stood up. Coralie Trask, Your Honor, representing the sole owner of the estate. Miss Trask, Farrow said, raising an eyebrow. You've come a long way from the city for a simple receivership hearing. It isn't a simple receivership, Your Honor, Coralie said, her voice ringing clear and hard across the quiet courtroom. It is the culminating step in a multi-year conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, wire fraud, and the malicious encumbrance of a private estate. And the man who orchestrated it is standing at the plaintiff's table. The courtroom went dead silent. Arlo's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Objection, Arlo finally stammered, gripping the edge of his table. This is absurd slander. I have 3 exhibits for the court, Coralie interrupted, pulling a thick stack of manila folders from her briefcase. She handed them to the bailiff, who carried them up to the bench. Exhibit A, Coralie said, pacing slowly in front of our table. A letter of intent from a Manhattan commercial developer, agreeing to purchase my client's property for $4.2 million. It is signed by Sutton Calloway, listing himself fraudulently as the primary executor. The document is dated August 12, 2023, 3 years before this this supposed sudden mental breakdown required an emergency receivership to save the business. Brendan turned entirely white. He looked back at Sutton. Sutton was staring hard at the floor, his jaw tight. Exhibit B, Coralie continued, her voice gaining momentum, filling the room. Bank records from yesterday morning, showing a withdrawal of $250,000 from a commercial line of credit drawn against my client's LLC. The funds were transferred immediately to an offshore holding account. Judge Farrow looked up, his brow furrowed deeply. Who authorized this withdrawal? Sutton Calloway, Coralie said, using the forged partnership agreement Mr. Locke just handed you. An agreement my client never signed. An agreement that was notarized on Friday afternoon by Arlo Locke himself. Farrow looked down at the partnership agreement on his desk. He looked at the notary stamp. Then he looked slowly up at Arlo. The casual golf buddy familiarity was entirely gone from the judge's eyes, replaced by a cold, dangerous fury. Mr. Locke, Farrow said softly, did you notarize a document transferring executive authority of this LLC without the primary owner present in the room? Arlo swallowed hard. His knuckles were bone white against the dark wood of the table. Your Honor, I was led to believe by my clients that verbal authorization had been granted by the respondent. Did you physically witness her signature on this document, Arlo? Farrow's voice cracked like a whip. Arlo looked at Brendan, then at Coralie. He lowered his head. No, Your Honor. Exhibit C, Coralie said, driving the final nail in without a shred of mercy. A handwritten extortion letter from Hester Calloway to my client's grandfather, dated 1997, alongside a printed email from Hester to Brendan Calloway, detailing a deliberate strategy to leverage marital assets to seize the property upon the grandfather's death. This entire marriage was a real estate acquisition strategy. The petition before you is not a request for receivership. It is a request for this court to rubber stamp a theft. Judge Farrow didn't speak for a long time. He read the extortion letter. He read the email. The silence in the room was so absolute I could hear the hum of the air conditioner kicking on. Brendan slowly sank into his chair. The concerned husband act had completely evaporated, leaving nothing but a hollow, terrified shell of a man realizing he was about to lose everything. In the gallery, Hester sat rigidly frozen, her silk scarf suddenly looking like a noose. Judge Farrow dropped the papers onto his desk. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The petition for receivership is denied with extreme prejudice, Farrow said, his voice laced with absolute disgust. The temporary injunction against the respondent's assets is denied. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate freeze on all bank accounts associated with Brendan and Sutton Calloway. Farrow pointed a thick finger directly at Arlo. Mr. Locke, you will surrender your notary ledger to the court clerk before you leave this building. I am forwarding this transcript and these exhibits to the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office for immediate review regarding felony forgery and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You are dismissed. He struck his gavel. The sharp crack echoed off the wood-paneled walls like a gunshot. We walked out of the courtroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind us. I felt lighter. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been sitting on my chest since 2:14 am on Friday was entirely gone. Brendan burst through the doors a moment later, rushing into the marble hallway. Wait, just wait a minute. Coralie stepped smoothly between us, raising a hand like a traffic cop. If you speak to my client, I will have the bailiff arrest you for harassment right now. You can communicate with me regarding the divorce proceedings, and you will need to find new representation immediately, because your current lawyer is going to be indicted by Friday. Brendan looked over Coralie's shoulder, locking eyes with me. He looked pathetic. The tailored suit didn't hide the fact that he was just a small, greedy man who had built his life on someone else's labor. I didn't want it to go this far, Brendan said, his voice cracking, pleading for some kind of absolution. My mother pushed it. Sutton pushed it. I loved you. You loved the dirt, I told him, my voice perfectly steady. And you don't get to keep it. I turned and walked away down the hall, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. Coralie walked beside me. When we reached the exit, she opened her briefcase and handed me a heavy envelope. The divorce papers, Coralie said. I'll handle the DA and the bank regarding the stolen $250,000. Arlo's malpractice insurance will end up covering it once he's disbarred and the dust settles. Go home. Run your business. I drove back upstate with the windows down. The air smelled like pine and hot asphalt. When I finally turned down the long gravel driveway of the venue, it was quiet. The corporate retreat had packed up, and my staff had gone home for the day. The main pavilion stood massive and silent in the late afternoon sun, the river stones warm to the touch. I unlocked the main office. I didn't check the servers. I didn't look for hidden files. I walked over to the floor safe, spun the dial, and pulled out the thick leather binder Grandpa Walter had given me. I opened it and ran my hand over the heavy paper of the deed. My maiden name was still there, printed in bold black ink. I carried the binder out to the front porch of the office. I sat down on the wooden steps, feeling the solid, undeniable reality of the earth beneath me. It was a ruined dairy farm when Walter found it. He had bled into it to make it an empire, and I had kept my promise. No one was going to put their name on my dirt.